Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band podcast. I'm your host, Benedikt, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen-Flood. How are you, Malcolm?
Hello. I'm great, Benny. How are you?
Great, thank you. Happy birthday to you. Happy belated birthday. It's probably a week and a half after your birthday, but I still wanted to do that on the episode. So.
Yeah, well, at time of recording, it is only 2 days after my birthday. I am officially a 31-year-old man.
31? God. I always forget you're younger than me. It's like, It's really weird. I always think I must be younger, but it's not the case. You've done so much in your life. Yeah, like with all the things you do and the TV and movie and traveling and whatnot, I always feel like you're years ahead.
I'm packing stuff in as fast as I can. That's funny.
So you had a great birthday, right?
Yeah, it was awesome. I was working on a show that I'm not really allowed to talk about yet, but I'm not even going to say what we were doing, but it was exciting and a little dangerous and pretty, it was a very West Coast experience. I had a great time. And then, got home yesterday, spent some time with family and friends, and things are great. I'm a little sleepy today. If you're watching the live stream, I can tell that I look sleepy. I know.
Thankfully, I don't think we have a live stream today, but if you watch on YouTube,
great.
Later, then
right.
I mean,
that's what I meant to. Wherever the video of me looking tired gets posted.
Yep, there's going to be a YouTube video, absolutely.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody in the community that gave me a little birthday shout out on the Facebook community. Totally appreciate that. You guys are all awesome, guys and girls, all super awesome. Yeah,
you truly are. By the way, if you're not in there, go to the selfrecordingband.com/community and join us. And I think it was Torsten who thought about you and posted the congrats post. So
he's a thoughtful man, Torsten. He tried to get a coordinated birthday song for you on our last group chat, but we couldn't get everybody speaking at the same time, so it didn't come together. But it's the thought that counts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So. All right. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you know that we talk about the process of making a record a little bit today. Like, that's not the title of the episode, but it's about the process. So I have something for you, something free. If you go to the selfrecordingband.com/10-step guide, it's a PDF, sort of like a mini ebook. I've talked about it in the past. It's still relevant. I update it every now and again, so it's always kind of up to date. And it's like, it's timeless also, really, because it's not about gear. It's about the process of making a record. It walks you through the 10 steps. I sort of boiled it down to 10 steps that you need to go through when you make a record, start to finish, and things you need to watch out for and take care of, and like all these things. So if you go to the selfrecordingband.com/10-step guide, you can download that PDF. And I think this will be a good starting point, at least. And it's probably even more than that. So good. Download that. Let me know if that's helpful. And that's what I have for you today.
Awesome.
What to say about that?
No, go check that out. Grab that stuff. It's great. Benny, you did mention that you had something exciting to say, though, before this episode.
Yeah, I was kind of rambling about on this PDF thing now because I was thinking about another thing that got me so excited that I can't wait to talk about it. It's kind of hard when my brain, my brain can't do two things at the same time. When I think about something, I just can't talk anymore. That's just, that's always the same thing for me. So, I discovered, like, if you've been listening for a while, people, you know that I'm a sucker for great tools and productivity things and like little software helpers and stuff like that. And I got a lot of them, and some of them are probably not really necessary, and some are really cool, others not so much. But like, I tested all sorts of things, but I found something this week that is probably the most exciting one, at least in a while, if not like of all times. It's like one of the best ones that I've found so far. It's like really amazing. And I don't even know if that's really relevant for our listeners, but I just want to tell you, Malcolm.
This is the kind of stuff we get excited about. Yep.
Yeah. So there used to be, I don't know, this is probably only relevant for people who use a calendar sort of religiously like I do. Like I do everything out of my calendar. Like I schedule everything. I have so many projects at the same time with different deadlines, different delivery dates for stuff. And so I have to have a calendar, I have to be organized. And I would recommend doing that to some extent, even if you're like, quote unquote just a band or work on a band project, just because of like, having a timeline when things are actually finished, when to expect mixes, when to have demos ready or whatever. Like there's always these sort of steps and things to schedule. So I recommend using a calendar. But sometimes life gets in the way. And what happens in my case is my calendar's full. It's like beautifully laid out and perfectly planned. And I'm super excited, like at the start of every week. And then probably by Monday noon or something, the whole plan sort of goes out the window because something happens that sort of that changes everything. And then I have to go in and reschedule, and like nothing works as planned anymore. And it's kind of frustrating. So I found a tool that takes that away from me. I don't have to do that anymore because there is a tool that's called Motion. It's a tool where you just put in, it's a calendar tool that syncs with your Google Calendar, whatever you use, and you just add tasks or projects. There's the distinction between a task, which is a single thing, actionable thing, and a project, which consists of multiple tasks. You can add a task or project into Motion, and you tell it, like, this is the project or the task. This is how long it will take. You just estimate how long it will take. And then you say, this is the deadline. You say it's a hard deadline or a soft deadline, or it's like, or it can be done ASAP, like whenever, like there's these different parameters. You just type that in. You add the task. You do that for every single project you have. And then the tool will automatically calculate, and you put in your work hours, of course, so you can block out time that you don't want to work on anything, like all these things. You do that once. It took me it's really straightforward to set it up. It took me about like 15 minutes to set that up. And then I just added my current projects to it. And then it calculates and populates a schedule for you that makes sure that you meet every deadline and that you stay within your work hours, you keep your breaks or whatever you have, your lunch break or whatever it's important to you. And the cool thing is when it knows which tasks are sort of mandatory and have to be done at this time, because otherwise you won't get it done by the deadline. And it knows which of the tasks are sort of flexible still. And it gives you scheduling links such as Calendly or something. You have a built-in scheduler there, so people can book meetings with you and stuff. And those flexible things stay available. The other ones are busy and blocked. And whenever things change, so when, for example, I don't know, like you need to do some unexpected thing and you can't get something done, you click, I'll do it later, or I can't do it, or you just delete it, and then it recalculates the whole schedule. It like blah, 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 and everything's different. But you're still on time, and it does that automatically. And every time you add a new project, you don't have to know when you want to do that. It just does that for you. And now I have to just look at my calendar. I know exactly what I need to do today. And if something is quicker than expected, or it takes longer than expected, the schedule automatically changes, and I don't have to do anything. And I like a couple of days into this, I'm already faster finishing stuff before I thought I could finish them. It's less stressful. So for me, the way I work, it works perfectly. Like it's. I can't really explain it properly. I think you have to look at what it does, but it's like an intelligent calendar where you just put in your task and it does all the rest for you. It's like having an assistant who like manages your schedule and it does everything automatically, which is perfect for me.
Very cool. I'm interested. I'm looking it up right now. It's usemotion.com, right?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I found the one. Very cool. Listeners, I promise this kind of ties into our episode.
Yeah.
Kind of in a vague little way. Yeah. Sort of, yeah. There's a point, because we're talking about getting stuff done in timely manners, more or less, and how long that can take. But we'll get back to that. I want to learn more about this. Does it like implement with your phone well and your computer? Like, is it all integrates into your kind of digital?
Yes, and it does it so well. That's what I love about it. Like they set it up so well. Like the onboarding process itself is so straightforward, so easy. And it's like there's a web app, there's a browser extension, a widget that sort of lives at the side of my screen. When I hover to the right with my mouse, it like pops up and it says like add a new task. And you just, while you're working on something, you can just add a new task without having to open some app or some website. You can quickly see your calendar. You can quickly populate a message when like somebody wants a meeting with you or a call. You can just create message for that person. It sends an email to them saying, hey, these are my available times this week. Just pick one. Or here's a link to schedule one. It does that automatically. You don't have to think about it because it knows when you are available. And you always have that, whatever you're working on, it's always there. You just have to hover over it with the mouse, and then you can add a task or remove something. So works very well. There's a phone app that works well. And I don't want to, like, I'm not advertising for this thing, and I don't have an affiliate link yet. I might have one soon if I keep using it. But for now, it's like I'm just talking about it because I found it really exciting, and it's finally something that really is. It's really something I needed. Sometimes it's just things I want, but this is really something I needed because it got so frustrating, and my wife is working in the company as well, and she does a lot of scheduling for me, but also for her, it was always frustrating when things are constantly changing and you always have to reschedule everything.
Right.
And this thing's just been amazing so far. And it's crazy how well it prioritizes things also. Like, yeah, it's just, you have to try it. It's like really, really cool. They give you a free trial, and it integrates well with everything I do.
Cool. All right. I'm such a paper day planner guy that, I mean, I use my calendar, but I'm curious if I can make this work. I would love to make it work.
Yeah, the only requirement is you have to stick to the calendar then. Like if you don't do that, like then it doesn't work, of course. You have to do what the calendar tells you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but if that's exactly what I want. Like I want to be like the dentist who comes to the practice like in the morning, and then, okay, which patient is in which room and what do I have to do at which time? And then I'm, so that's what I want. Like I don't want to have to think about it. Yeah.
It's smarter. That is, you're taking a lot of decisions off your plate, which is totally smart. Okay, I'm going to commit to trying it for 5 days because that's how long the free trial is.
Yes, exactly. Like it took me half a day to be convinced, like, but that might just be me. Anyway, so enough about that. Like, but it sort of ties into today's episode. That's what Malcolm said, and you're totally right, because we're talking about how long it actually takes, or should take, or can take to produce a song start to finish. And I said these 3 different things now because there is no standard time frame that like every project takes this long. But there is maybe, I'd say, we'll talk about that. So I think it shouldn't take longer than a certain amount of time, and it shouldn't be, or it's probably not faster than a certain amount of time as well. And we're going to talk about that. Maybe your experience is a little different there than mine, and everybody's different, of course. But I think there's a time frame that we can give you guys, and we can talk from experience. And we just want to make sure you're not cutting corners and rushing it, but also we want to prevent you from like making everything like take forever. And I've seen both. And I wanted to do this episode because I'm talking to so many people on coaching calls and with my mixing clients and everything. And there are these people who completely underestimate how long it actually takes to do something like that properly. And then there are people who overcomplicate it so much, or who just give themselves so much time that chances are they're never going to finish it at all. So just last week, I had a quote request for mixing where the person said, I think it was 11 songs, and I asked for like when are the tracks ready and by when do you want them back and stuff. And he was like, okay, so far it takes me about 3 months to finish a song, so that would be probably 2 years, and then the 11 songs would be done. And I'm like, okay, but like, do you want to schedule a mix in 2 years now for this record, or what do you want to do? Like, this is crazy long. Like, you can do that faster, And chances are you're never going to finish the record if you give yourself 2 years to do that.
Yeah, you'll lose interest. Your taste in music will change. You'll get over the songs and not be inspired anymore because they won't mean anything to the person you are at that time. A lot changes in a couple of years. To me, that's totally crazy for sure. But I've been there. I'm finishing an album right now that we're like really close to 12 months on.
Me too. I'm finishing I'm starting to mix a record now that they booked in November 2020. So also
wow. All right.
14 months in or so. It took them COVID and stuff. It's like a different thing, and I could totally get that. But again, it shouldn't take you too long, but you shouldn't also not rush it. And it's all about like expectations. And we just want to help you and give you sort of, from our experience, some, I don't know what to call it, like some rule of thumb maybe, or like just, just talk about how long it took us in the past to produce something properly when things went well.
Perspective. And, it's a really good idea to look at professionals in your field and mimic them and try and gain perspective from how they do things. And Benny and I used to both professionally produce bands. Now we're both just mixing and mastering. But by doing that, we have an idea of like how long that process generally would take. And I was still producing bands for a long time while we were doing this podcast, which is all about teaching bands to record themselves. And one of the reasons people were still hiring me, despite me having a podcast teaching them how to do it themselves, is because they could not get it done in time. They were just like, this is taking forever. We have no idea. Like we need a captain for this ship. And they would just keep hiring me to produce a record. And I think this podcast has succeeded in some ways in helping people get better at that. But this we should totally be addressing this and giving you an idea of what that time frame can look like, because you could probably doing it. I think in most cases, most bands are taking too long, but at some steps they're going way too quick or not doing them at all.
Yeah, it could be a combination. Actually, I've seen it where it takes people forever to finish it, but then at some point when they finally get to record it and the session is sort of, everything's recorded, they have it in a session, from that moment on they think now it's going to be very quick to just finish this. So it's a combination of both. It takes forever from the idea of making a record until it's actually recorded, and then from the raw recording to the finished thing, they kind of underestimate how long it takes. That's often the case, like this combination of the two in my experience.
Yeah, totally. All right. So I think our plan here is just to go through kind of each step of the process and discuss how that could look from a timeline stance.
Yeah, excluding the writing and arranging part, because we've talked about the whole process of making a record in a whole other episode, where we talk about like start to finish, what is involved and everything. Like for this episode, let's assume you've already written a song and you can play it as a band, you've rehearsed it, so you think you're ready to record now, you're ready to set up your recording rig and like hit record, do it, and then and everything that follows after that until it's done. Like we'd talk about that and how long each step can take, should take, whatever. So I want to start by saying that when you've written a song and you can play it, you've rehearsed it, chances are it's probably not completely finished and ready to record yet. Depending on your demoing process or whether or not you did proper pre-pro, chances are you can play it and you feel like it's ready, but when you record it for the first time, if you skip the pre-pro, then you will probably discover things that need to be addressed. Like could be performance issues, could be technical things, could be arrangement issues. So this is the first thing that I want to talk about. A lot of times when people think they're ready, they're actually not, and they underestimate that there's this gap between, okay, we have a song and now we're ready to actually enter the studio. And I think when I was still producing, a lot of time I had to guide people, I helped them prepare for the studio. So from the day they booked the session until they actually got into the studio, we were helping them prepare properly, prepare the instruments, prepare themselves, prepare the songs. So there's these steps in between that a lot of people don't really think about. And in your opinion, like, what does that look like, or in your experience, is that a thing? Like, how long does that typically take a band, or can take a band?
Yeah. So it's going to look different. I think especially these first steps, it's going to look different from a band-to-band situation. And I think Benny and I will both be pulling from our experiences of being hired as a producer, but as the bands and musicians listening to this podcast, you should just kind of be assuming that whenever we say producer or us, it's you. It's whoever's in charge of the recording in the band. So you got to kind of take that and make it fit your world. But first thing I would ask for is demos. Yeah, send me the music. I want to hear the songs you want to record. And sometimes that would mean that they have to record them for the first time. So that is obviously a step that can't be skipped. And kind of what you're alluding to is that, oh, we've written the song, we're ready to record. It's like, no, you haven't made a demo yet. So the producer needs to get the demo. And again, if that's you in the band, you are the producer, you need to listen to your song. You need to not play it and just listen to it. So having a file that is the song recorded is important. That could be a cell phone recording it, in the middle of the jam space at the bare minimum, or that could be a full multi-track thing to a click track, overdubbed and everything, which I think it should be. But anything is better than nothing. So you have to get that done. So, but as far as timing goes, with how long it takes to do that, it does depend on the process you choose to use for recording it. I am a big fan of trying to do like live demos to a click track for pre-pro, if you're tight enough, because it's you can change things on the fly then, and just be like, oh, well, let's try that again with a different ramp. You kind of get to make pre-pro decisions live as a band. But if you can't and you can just do multi-track, that's awesome. And there's advantages to that as well, because the tracks you're cutting then stand a chance of being used in the final thing, if you're being really diligent about it, but it takes longer. So I would say, depending on the setup, you're probably going to, like if you're doing overdub pre-pro, you're going to need a day per song, I think, to rough it out. Yeah. What do you think, Benny?
Yeah, I agree. Because it's not it doesn't have to be the best performance ever or the best tones. It's more about learning about how well you can play it, whether or not the tempo works, if the arrangement is really there. Maybe you have some ideas you still want to try, I agree that it shouldn't take you longer than a day to record that properly. I'd say though that the whole process typically takes a little longer because I would do multiple rounds of pre-pro. I would do one, give it to just a few select people, or maybe even non-musicians, just to get some feedback, some outside perspective. Obviously, you don't want to send it to too many people if it's not finished yet, but some feedback doesn't hurt usually. I would let it sit there for, 2 or 3 days to just get some objectivity back maybe. Then I would do another round, implement what you've learned or what needs to be changed until you feel like, okay, this is what we're going to record. This is pretty much it. And so I'd say, a day to record everything. Maybe you do another round or two. So this all depends obviously on the rest of your life and whether or not you have a full-time job and stuff like that. But so it could be done within a week or two, I think, the whole pre-pro process, depending on how long you give yourself. But 2 or 3 days to record different versions of pre-pro, some feedback in between. That's what I'd say. And you can even do more than one song on that one day. If once you have your setup, you know how you want to record and all that. I think you could do an EP a day, even just getting some raw tracks and doing pre-pro. If you don't, because I think the point of pre-pro is also to not go into too much detail. So you shouldn't obsess too much over which mic pre or which all these details and
none
settings.
Of those things should matter.
Yeah, just worry about the song and about the performances, but they don't have to be perfect as well. And anything from between a day and 2 weeks or so, and then you can probably get pre-pro done for a single or an EP even. If you're very organized and you don't have a job and or whatever, then you could do pre-pro for a whole record in a week or two. That depends on your life situation.
It does, yeah, absolutely. Just main goals is coming out of it with improving the song. You want to come out of it and be all right, well, we listened to it and decided we need to up the tempo here on the course or whatever it is. That's the whole point. And then ideally, if you come out of it with some scratch tracks to start recording too, that is really awesome as well.
Yes, totally, exactly.
You're making the skeleton of the session, essentially.
Yeah. Now, things could take a little bit longer if you find that you need to practice stuff or you need to rewrite parts that just don't work or something. That could happen. It could be that it felt right and while you were rehearsing, but now that you hear it recorded, you actually there might be some drum fills that are not really playable, or there might be a weird something that just is very hard, and maybe you need to simplify things, or maybe you just need to practice until you can really nail it, or maybe there's a cool vocal thing that you absolutely want to do, but you need some training to actually pull that off, and then you should probably give yourself a little more time to practice because that's usually worth it. Or you need to simplify things, so that could make it take longer. So that is the part where I'd say don't cut any corners, because I see a lot of people just skip these things, and I think this is the part of making a record where you should give yourself some time. Shouldn't take forever, but you should really make sure that when you actually hit record, when you go into the actual recording session, none of those things should be holding you back. You shouldn't think about, can I actually sing this? Can I actually play this? Do we have the required gear? Is our gear in good shape? Which room are we going to record in? All these things. Do we need to treat the room? Do we want to record to click or not? Which tempo? All these questions, they should have been taken care of during pre-pro.
Yep.
And then when you go to the actual recording session, it's going to be a lot quicker. So
yeah, it should be much quicker. The more you think about all of those things in the pre-pro, the quicker and better it'll go. It's really a balancing act, because you don't want to be obsessing and spending hours trying to get the right tone. But if the tone is just oddly wrong, you should think about why and what you need to do to solve that. Be okay, we need a different guitar. I've got a big hollow body and it's just not doing the trick for this. Or, I don't know why we thought fretless bass was a good idea, but it's not. We got to change it. Yeah. You should be addressing things. And okay, the drummer flubbed the big fill going into the first chorus. Was it just a mistake? If it's just he can play it, and it's in time enough, yeah, sure, move on. But if it's can he play it? Can he actually play it? Are we going to spend hours trying to fix that in the studio and waste a bunch of money or whatever our situation is? You totally want to address it.
Yes, agreed. And Yeah, agreed. Just agreed. Totally. So yeah, that's it. And then I think the whole point is that when you are actually recording, and this is even more important when you do everything yourself, you have to be able to focus on the performance, on capturing the moment, the performance, and the vibe, the energy, and all of that more than anything. So if you need to do these things anyways that Malcolm just mentioned, like you need to figure these things out anyway, and you should do it before the recording session, because if you don't do it, you'll have to do it in the recording session, and that's where you should actually focus on how does it feel. Like it shouldn't be about trying to capture a take without mistakes. It should be about capturing the best take, like the one that feels best, and you should be able to focus on that, and the technical stuff should be out of the way and all of those things, So, okay, so now let's assume you've done that properly. You took some time and you spent, I don't know, a week or two really refining your songs and doing pre-pro. Maybe you gave yourself some time to practice and all that, and now you're actually ready to record. So I think if you've done it properly, if you've done your job, I think a song, like including, there's, you got to know that there's the setup time that it takes just to get everything right, like new drum heads, new strings, all of that. You can do that in advance, of course, but that just takes time. And then you probably want to, even with the best of, like, even if you're really prepared, you probably want to compare different mic positions and be more detailed when it comes to the actual tones and stuff. Yeah. So there's some setup and time involved. So I think, in my experience, and I'm curious to hear what you say about that, Malcolm, but in my experience, at least like half a day or so would be just setup. Sometimes like it would be half a day could be just drum setup, and the other half of the day could be guitars and vocals and all that. So when I did full records with bands or EPs or so, I would usually schedule a day just to prepare everything. And then the next day we would start fresh, and we would only worry about the recording, so we wouldn't do it the same day. So I would suggest scheduling one day where it's all about making sure everything works, making sure what you thought is a good idea in pre-pro actually turns out to be a good idea. Make sure that the mic positioning, the mic choice, the placement of everything is working. Make sure you have fresh strings and drum heads and tuning and all of that. Set that all up, and then leave for the day and come back fresh and only worry about the performance. So that's what I would always do. So it would typically take me a day to set up, and then it would take me, I'd say a day to a day and a half or so per song to do the actual tracking on average. Like I would schedule a day and a half per song. So for a 10-song record, I might schedule 15 days of like just recording time, for example.
Now here's something to clarify. You edit after recording generally. More often than not, right? It's kind of like a record and then edit step for you, right?
Except for drum editing. Mm-hmm. So I was just talking about like the net like tracking time. It would be for 10 songs would be like 2 weeks, 14 days, 15 days, something like that typically. But within like the total time of it would be maybe 20 days, because after the first 5 days or so we would do drums, and then there would be a break. Like, okay, when I didn't, I have to think about it from the perspective of self-recording bands. So for me, before I had Thomas who would help me with editing, before I had assistants helping me with editing while we're doing the session, I had to do all the drums. Then we had a break of a couple of days where I would edit the drums, and then we would move on with the rest, and I would edit the guitars, the bass, and the vocals after the session is done. So it could be like 5 days of drums for a record, 3 days of editing those drums, then we continue tracking, and it would be another 10 days of tracking all the rest, and then I would edit all the rest. So that was the process. Later, when I had help with that, or you can do that as well if you're outsourcing, which is really great. If you find someone remotely who you can send your drum tracks to, you can track one song, immediately send it out, work on the next song while the other person edits at the same time. And I got to a point where when we were done drum tracking, we had, like when we were done recording 10 songs, 8 of those were already edited, and we could immediately move on. So that's the ideal situation. And the best part is when you have someone in a different time zone, because then you can record during the day, and then at night when you're done, the other person on the other side of the world would edit, and the next day your stuff is finished. That's perfect.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Big fan of that happening.
Totally.
And I don't understand why this is going on a tangent here, but it's like self-recording bands think they're not allowed to hire editors because they're not professional engineers or producers. And it's like, no, like anybody can hire a drum editor or an audio editor. or vocal tuning or whatever. Anybody is allowed to access those sort of services. Yeah. It's not a special club.
Yeah, and I would actually recommend that a lot. And I think I would really, unless you really like that or you have the time and you also know what you're doing, like it's so worth outsourcing that, just because of, like, if you're doing everything yourself for the objectivity alone and for the perspective and all that, you don't want to spend 3 days listening to every single drum hit over and over while you're recording the record. It's a much better idea to just give that to someone. You get back perfect tracks and you keep recording to those. It's much more fun. It's such a smooth process, and it's like, I don't think you as the producer should do that. I mean, you're wearing enough hats. You are the producer, the engineer, the musician, all at the same time. You shouldn't be the editor and the editing engineer as well, I think. But I mean, you could, but it's just me, and I think it's not too expensive. Usually it costs money, but it's like affordable in the grand scheme of things, I think. And so at least the drums, maybe you can take the time and edit everything else once you've captured everything. But like during making the record, I would absolutely give the drums to somebody. Also, you're never going to be as fast as them. That's the same thing. Like if you do it yourself, it could mean that you need a 2-week break or so until you can continue, because you're just not as fast. If you give it to someone who does that all day, you can get your drum tracks back within 3 days or so if the person's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you value your time at all, it's more affordable to hire somebody, without a doubt. And if you don't know what you're doing, you could really do damage to your songs as well. Be that by doing a bad job at the editing, it just sounds bad, or by over editing and you've kind of lost perspective on the feel. I find people, when they're starting out with editing, don't really know how far to push it, and they just get nervous and go too far. And you don't want that either, right?
Yeah,
generally.
Totally. Yeah. So would you agree with the, let's say, a full day setup, maybe another day just as a buffer because you need to change things in between, or you might need different setups for different things, but like 1 or 2 days just for setup and stuff, and then 1.5 days or so per song? Would you agree with that, or would you give it more time, less time?
I
for
think
a typical band, I'm talking
lands
like
up at the same time.
Yeah.
I just think of it differently. Generally, I was editing as I was working, rather than like batching it. So it's like we kind of weren't done guitars for that song until it was edited as well. Like we're just kind of both beside each other until it's like, hey, this song's done. Boom. Not always, but that's usually how I worked, because I was usually doing, usually because we were working on a single only. So it made sense just to be like, let's just finish it. But yeah, on a more recent album, we did do just like a lot of tracking and less editing, and then editing after. And yeah, it pretty much lined up to that. My quoting was always assume 2 songs a day. That's including editing, which I think more or less lines up. So that'd be like, 20 days for a 10-song album, thereabouts.
Yeah, sort of the same thing. Yeah,
recording and editing. So it's close. Sometimes it would be less. Sometimes it could be more. It could be a lot more, but not that much more. But
I mean, that is, and that's interesting, because I think more is always possible, and it depends on your budget. But it doesn't mean it always gets better if you take more time. No. So yeah, you've probably heard stories of, and a lot of people do that if they have the budget, of people like spending months at the studio to record a record. And you can do that, and you can be great with the right team, and if everybody is focused, and you try a lot of things, and like, but I think for most self-recording bands, it's not really beneficial to do that, just because you have a life outside of music, and the longer it takes, the more likely you are to just lose interest, or things get stressful and you make mistakes. You start rushing things, although you're actually taking more time, but you start rushing things because you don't want to spend as much time on music anymore at some point, So I think batching stuff, maybe taking a week off or 2 from your job if you can, and batch stuff and like just focus on that one thing and get it done, is better than taking a very long time to do it. If you have the luxury of like 3 months off and like all the time to experiment, and you really want to do that, then by all means do it. But I wouldn't compare myself to like these bands who would book a big studio for half a year to make a record. I wouldn't do that as a self-recording band. I think
absolutely.
I think that's not a good idea. So, and then also when it comes to setup, I know people do it that way, and I took longer than a day sometimes if I need it. Depends on the record. But I know that there are people who would take like a week or 2 just to set up drums. Yeah, I mean, again, if you have the time and the mental bandwidth and all, and to do that, and you want to try every single drum head on the planet and compare them all, and you want to try all the different snare drums and rent a bunch of things and like all these, you can do that. But I doubt that it's actually worth it in the end. So if you do your homework and some research before and you pick the right gear for what you're going for, and I think you can be much quicker than that. And I think in most cases you should, but that's just my opinion.
I totally agree. And I actually want to say that even if you can afford it, you probably shouldn't, because there's a hidden little skill factor involved in being one of those people that can spend that much time. And it comes with outrageous amounts of experience. I would say it took me like 5 years to figure out what a good bottom snare sounds like, because they sound like garbage on their own, no matter what. And now I'm like, I know what I'm looking for. It still sounds like garbage on its own, but I hear it and I'm like, that's pretty sweet. That's what I want.
Yeah.
And like, so if you're just getting into this and you are swapping out drum heads and stuff, they're just going to sound different. You won't know which one's going to, like, how it's going to play with other instruments that are yet to come and stuff like that. You just don't know what you're really looking for, because especially drums, it's the sum of all the parts, not the individual things that really make it come together. So I think point. Time is the enemy. You want to be shooting from the hip.
Yes, exactly. That's such a good point. I remember, especially with snare drums, I really remember when I was starting out, I watched a video where someone was like, okay, we've tried the snare, or we've used the snare on the record, but for this particular song, we used a different one because the other one didn't work as well. Mm-hmm. And I remember myself, like, I remember watching this video and I was like, how did you know that the snare didn't work for that song? Like, why did it not work? It sounds like a snare. Like, I really didn't understand why a different snare would be the better choice. I heard that they sounded different, but I couldn't tell you why one would be better than the other. And so that's probably the situation that a lot of our listeners are in. So even if you have the luxury of trying 10 different snare drums, how would you know which one to go with? You know, it's like just more options, more confusion. And I totally agree, Malcolm. Okay.
You know, I did want to give one story, and it was making a Band of Rascals album. We were shooting out guitars really, just playing a part with a guitar and different guitars and listening. And I was like, oh, that one sounds meatier. And Eric Ratz, our producer, looked at me and he was like, I'm listening to the snare. I was like, what do you, he was like, how does it sound? Like, how does the snare sound against the guitars? Like, that's what I'm listening for. And I was like, whoa, like I'm just obsessing over my guitar tone. And he's like, no, like, how does it fit with the song already? It's like, okay, totally different perspective. Big learning moment.
Yes, exactly. And you can do a lot of that experimenting during pre-pro, during practice. Like, you can do that all year. You can do that. You should actually experiment and try things, but I don't think the actual recording session is the time to do that. So... And over time, you get more experienced with that, and your taste develops and all that, and that's totally fine and a good thing. But in that 1 week or those 2 weeks that you have to actually record your record, you should focus on getting that done.
Totally.
I think.
Yeah. So just to circle back and really cement that, we both landed at like 1.5 to 2 days per song. Think about that, like, and apply it to what you've done so far with your band. How long has it been taking you? How long have you been working on your latest recording song? Is it way past 2 days? We need to assess why. You need to assess why. This is a podcast. I can't hear you talking back at me. But like, so many people just get so caught up and they're like, oh, the album's almost finished. It's been like 12 months. And it's like, why? Like, just get that music out there and learn, and you're going to come back with more songs. So don't take too long. Yeah. Just want to drive that home.
Yeah. And just to clarify, we're talking about recording only, like, or in your, like, recording and editing, sort of. But depending on whether or not you're good with editing, this could take longer just because of the editing. Like, if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not experienced, editing alone can add another 2 weeks to that or so, you know? Like, again, think about maybe hiring someone to do that or getting better at it, like practicing that. Because, I don't know, how long does it take you typically to edit a song? Can you give us a raw estimate there?
Yeah. So I think that big album I was talking about, where we did more of the editing after tracking. Like I said, normally I do it kind of at the same time, but this time we kind of did a lot of tracking, other than drums. Like you said, drums got edited before we started stacking stuff. And then I went home and did editing, and it was probably like close to a day a song. So we did, I think we did 10 days of recording. Maybe it was like 11 or 12. And then I probably did 10 days of editing. And this was a very heavy editing album. Like, we wanted things insanely tight for like guitars cutting off and stuff like that. And so one of the heavier editing jobs I've had for sure. But I mean, that still lands us at 20 days for a full album. That seems about right.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so then I'd say there's one more thing I want to add to the whole recording process, which is there's a setup cost always. So if you don't batch things, if you only have the evenings and the weekends and you can take time off to do it all at once, it will take you longer because you have to get back to the sessions every single time. You have to remember where you left off and what you wanted to do. And, it makes things a little difficult. So whenever possible, I would recommend like really batching a project like that. That's one thing to keep in mind. And we had a coaching call with our academy students and coaching students where we discussed that because people find it difficult to get back into a session or to we were talking about what you can do to remember where exactly you left off and what was on your mind and why you made certain decisions, because when you come back 3 days later, perspective is different, everything. It just takes some time until you're back into the project, really.
Yeah.
So that, again, adds additional time, I think. And so whenever possible, I'd say take some time off and batch things. You don't have to do it. Not everybody in the band has to do it at the same time. Like, you could be that usually there's one person responsible for the sort of the engineering or the producer part, or you have some different roles in the band. That person obviously needs to be there, but not everybody else needs to be there all the time. So maybe 3, 4, or 5 days are enough for you, and maybe you can do that. And then,
right. Yeah. Now, to drive the same point home from a different angle, I'd say it's also more expensive because your strings are going to get burnt out while you take a week off and noodle with your guitar, or even just letting your strings sit there. Strings age just by sitting there, everyone. So new strings have to get put on. I know we say that all the time, but even if you didn't play it, if they're just sitting there, they're old. And it's not as bad as playing them, but it still does. They're not as spanky. So now you're buying more strings for the same song, which is ridiculous. You should only need one set of strings for a song, hopefully. And drum skins, definitely drum skins. Drummers like to hit their drums when they're not recording. So I think self-recording bands, you might be doing this at your jam space. So you might be mixing in recording with rehearsals and stuff like that. So you put on new skins for your first song, get a cool drum track down, and then you go back to rehearsing, preparing for a show. You get interrupted. And now you want to go record song 2, but the drum heads are all dead. Like, that's a huge amount of money. You just kind of have to reinvest again and again. So batching saves you money. Definitely.
Okay, cool. Now, after recording and editing comes mixing.
Mm-hmm.
And this gets pretty interesting now, I think, because we're both mixing for a living, and I don't produce or don't do anything else. Like, I coach and do this here, but other than that, I just mix. So naturally, it's probably going to be surprising to you when I tell you that I mix very, very, very fast now, and it's not the same. Like, you shouldn't expect the same when you mix your own songs. So. Right. You might be surprised to hear that I can mix, I don't know, sometimes I can mix 3 or 4 songs a day. And that's not because I'm cutting corners or because, I don't do it properly. That's because I've invested years of refining my process, the systems. I have people who work with me. I have, there's so much that other people do for me before I touch the session. Like Thomas, for example, he preps the sessions, he sets everything up. I have my templates. I have a dialed in room. I've been working out of this room for almost 10 years now. I know exactly what it sounds like. I'm in there every day. I can make decisions very, very fast. So that's also the reason why my mixes don't get cheaper, although I take less time to finish them. It's just because it took me so much time to get to that point. So like, nobody's paying for the 3 hours that I actually mix or the 5 hours that I actually mix, or sometimes it's 15 hours. It's never the same, but nobody actually pays for that, but they pay for all the experience and everything I had to put in there to get to that point. And it makes for a better end product because I spend less time on it, don't overthink stuff, work more intuitively. Yeah. And so you pay for the value, but you can't compare that with someone who's just starting out. That's not possible in the beginning. If you're just starting out and it only takes you 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours to mix a song, you're probably cutting corners. That's just not.
It's probably awful.
It's probably awful, yeah. And sometimes sometimes it takes me 2 days. So I'm not saying every song just takes that like that.
No,
and it's like, I just don't stop until it's there. No matter if I'm like, sometimes I'm done in 3 or 4 hours, and sometimes I need 2 or 3 days, and that's totally fine. I won't stop until I feel like it's ready. And for when you're just starting out or you mix your own band, it's probably going to be a lot longer than just a couple of hours. So I'd say there's also this probably, I'd say maybe at least a day, maybe a day, like for the first version of the mix. I think a day or 2 would be a good starting point, probably 2.
Yeah. Totally.
And after that, like, I don't. Yeah, I think. What do you say about that? I think probably 2 days would be a good starting point for one song.
Looking to professionals again, and we both have a lot of peers that do this. You know, some of my closest friends are other mix engineers and audio engineers. And the average seems to be, for a professional, about a day a song.
Yeah,
that's what I'd find. Benny, you have gotten on the. I think you're now in the uber fast league of mixers, which is pretty cool.
But I say it's cool, but I say I can sometimes mix 3 or 4 days a song, but the reality is, and like Thomas knows this if he's listening to this episode, and he's been sitting next to me, the reality, a lot of times when I mix, the reality is like 1 or 2 days is the 1 or 2 songs a day is the norm.
Right.
And on some projects I'm able to do more, and those are only projects also where it's like a full record with the same sort of setup that they use to track. It's supposed to sound very similar, you know, there's like the same drum tones, sort of the same guitar tones, so I can use a lot of what I did on the first mix will take longer. The first mix might be a day or two, but then the other songs might be way quicker than that because I've dialed in the tones already, and it's mostly automation and special effects and things like that. Those are the records that get done really, really quickly. If it's a record where every song is completely different, then this is not the case. So the norm is still like 1 or 2 songs a day, but sometimes I can mix 3 or 4 a day. So that's just what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I'm averaging a song a day. It's gotten a little quicker just recently because I hired an assistant as well. Shout out to Stacy, and that's speeding up the workflow quite a bit. So by the time I finish the first song, the second song's prepped and ready for me just to jump into it right away, and that cuts down a couple hours for sure. And again, like you said, when it is consecutive songs for the same album, it goes much, much quicker usually. But, you know, a day a song is what you can expect a professional to take. So if you are doing it yourself, which is honestly something we don't suggest, I mean, I remember at the end of the day, Benny and I, we send it when we're happy with it. Right. So hopefully that takes 4 hours or whatever. That's awesome. If it gets there in 4 hours, it's there in 4 hours. It doesn't really matter how long it takes. It just matters that it gets there. I've definitely spent like 5 days on a mix earlier in my career, without a doubt, to get it there. And that's just how long it took me. And, you know, we got it there and it was happy and they're happy. So that's awesome. But like, that's a long time. And it's very hard to keep perspective over that amount of time. The longer you go, the worse your ears start being in the day, but also just like in perspective to what actually matters anymore. So I think this is another spot where self-recording bands are either spending, like you said, Benny, way too little time, thinking like this probably, you know, we just slap on a smiley face EQ on the master bus, call it done, or way too long, and they're just tweaking forever and not really able to figure out why it sounds bad, and there's going in circles and you know, just mangling. Both of those situations are common. So I think knowing that if you're operating at a professional level, which is what you would want, it should be about a day. Should be. If it's not, that might be a sign that you need to outsource this.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think there's also this sort of thing that doesn't happen in a professional scenario where you when you're a band and one person in the band mixes it, everybody in the band will have an opinion, and it will for that reason alone, it will take probably forever because you're not alone finishing it. Everybody will want to hear where the mix is at, and then you send a rough mix or you send some version of like work in progress, and then you'll get 10 different opinions and things, and then you start over, or like it's just a more tedious process overall. Right. So first thing is I would not send it, or I would not even show it to the rest of the band. If you're the person mixing it, I would not show it to the rest of the band until you are really happy with it. It doesn't need to be like 100%, but like you need to feel very confident about the mix, and they will gonna like tear it apart anyways. So, you know, like make them do it at like finish it to a point where you feel you really like it, and then show it to them. Because if you send them 3 different versions of work in progress, each time you're gonna get like 10 different notes and opinions and stuff. So that's the first thing. And then at the end of that, like 1 or 2 days, or maybe 3 days, or whatever it takes, it still would be okay, I think, to take 2 or 3 days for a song. But at the end of that, there's gonna be revisions. So you need to factor that in. So it's not just mixing and then you're done. but you should let it sit there for a while. You should come back to it later yourself, and you should at some point show it to your bandmates, of course, and you should get some feedback. And then there's probably some things you want to tweak. You probably want to take it to other like systems, to the car or whatever, like do some tests. And then there will be a revision process. And this is very, I don't know, this is dangerous because it's important that everybody, of course, that you get that outside feedback because you're not as experienced, you're not as objective because it's your songs, you produce them, so it's going to be difficult to mix those. So the outside perspective is important. Everybody in the band has a different, like, of course, an opinion, and it's all, everybody needs to be heard, and I get that. But there's also this point where it's very dangerous that revisions can just take forever, and they can be so frustrating that at some point you just feel like you abandon the project, but you still don't feel like it's finished, and it can be frustrating. And I think you should finish strong. I think you should, yeah, it's hard to give advice there. You just shouldn't overdo it with the revisions. It's like,
yeah, I think you pointed out a really good thing, and it is that by being in the band, your bandmates are going to, I don't know how to word this. It's like respect you less.
Yeah, of course.
They don't think of you as a professional in that field. So they're probably less confident in the decisions you're making. Not that they don't respect you and think that you're going to do a good job, but they might just question it because I don't know. It's so deep, but you're probably going to have a hard time and get a lot of pushback on directions it's like, you're now messing with your drummers. Say you're the lead singer mixing, and you're like, we're going to use a snare sample on the drums and just totally change the drum sound. That's now like you've stepped into another band member's world and made a decision for them, which is kind of weird, right? Like the drummer might be like, whoa, that's my thing. Like, don't mess with my drums. Where when a mixer comes in, it's like, I'm thinking about the song only.
Yeah.
And there's no like territory to step on. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective I hadn't really considered before. So you got a little bit of an uphill battle if you're mixing yourself there.
100%. Also, they're gonna want to experiment. This is also something dangerous that sometimes happens. I have to sometimes explain that to artists that I'm working with, that the mix revisions are not the time to start experimenting and changing the production and like adding things that haven't been there before. Sometimes, I mean, it could be that now that you're hearing everything more clearly and properly, it could be that some things become obvious that you just didn't really hear in the raw version of it. So in that case, it might be a good idea to go back and change things. But you have to be very careful because mixed revisions are really not the time to experiment and do a lot of changes to steps that should have been completed before that. And that's really dangerous. Sometimes my mixing clients want to do the same thing. Once they hear their song properly, they come up with all these ideas and want to try all these different things. And we can do that, but it's just, you have to basically start over. Sometimes it means it's a new mix, basically. And sometimes it doesn't make things better because nobody's really objective at this point anymore, and you go down these rabbit holes that don't make the song better, only to find out a week later that you should have just gone with whatever you had. So
right, yeah, that's not the spot. You that's production decisions. That's not what mixing is. So careful with that. Yeah. Now, I guess just to draw the line that when we're talking about these timelines, we are talking about delivering a mix. So it's like, hey, here's the mix of the song. I love it. Let me know if you want anything tweaked. That timeline doesn't include how long it takes to get revision notes back. I've had that happen before where I'm like, yeah, I'll have you mix back to you by the end of the month. And then they don't get notes back to me for like a week and a half because, band's organization doesn't seem to happen sometimes. and then they're like, oh, we're behind. I'm like, no, you're behind. I delivered exactly when I said I would. You're dragging your feet here. So I would, if you're mixing yourself, really set deadlines that have to be like held. Like, all right, we're doing our revisions on this date, and whatever isn't in by then is not happening, kind of thing. Like, set rules. You'll be thankful.
Yes, exactly. And this also makes it sometimes difficult. If you've ever worked with a mix engineer, this is something that can cause confusion where you come up with some sort of agreement and some sort of deadline. You want to know the delivery date, and the person tells you like the mixes are done by this date, and you agree, and you schedule everything, you plan your release or whatever. And you totally forget that this is, as you said, Malcolm, this is the mixed delivery date. without revisions typically. So when I send out an agreement or a proposal to a band, it always says like delivery date excluding revisions. Like I can't know. There's no point I could know like how long it actually takes. I can tell you when my version of the mix will arrive. And when I send something out, to me it's done, because otherwise I wouldn't send it out. So you could use that and release it and move on. But if you feel like you don't want to use it for whatever reason, then I don't know how long it will take until we get over the finish line. So this is sometimes a little confusing to bands because they think that the deadline or the delivery date is the final thing where everything's finished. Yeah. But it's only like that if you don't have tons of revisions. So, and in your band, this could be much more difficult even than with a stranger because, like we're friends. So as you said, for whatever reason, we tend to respect friends less when it comes to working with them. So
it's not respect them less. It's just less afraid of hurting their feelings.
That's what it is. That's what it is. Yeah, it's harder to put boundaries in place on both sides, though. It's like, we all get that. Okay, so then there's mastering, the final step usually. And you could do that during mixing. You could sort of combine the two and do a full master sort of thing. You could just make it loud, and that could work. But you should probably, as a self-recording band, I think that mastering is if you don't do anything else, maybe just outsource the mastering just to get a final quality control and to get some proper mix feedback. And I think that's almost mandatory. Mastering is so hard to do yourself. It's just, and I know it can be done. There are courses on that and all that. But it's like proper mastering, mastering, the quality control, all the metadata, all the different file formats for different platforms, all these things. Most bands, most artists just are not able to do that properly, I'd say. So if you outsource the mastering and you do everything else yourself, it totally depends on the availability of your preferred mastering engineer, of course. Yeah. Mastering itself is pretty quick, but like who knows when the person has time. Then there's revisions. Again, there's another revision phase. Usually it's not as much as if at all, like as with mixing, but there might be revisions. So I'd say if you master yourself, and I'm interested in hearing your opinion there, Malcolm, because a lot of people say you should separate the two. You should mix and then let it sit there for a while and then do the mastering. I think that is true if you know what you're doing, and I think that is true for some people, but I could sort of change my mind a little bit, and I think if you're mixing yourself, it's very hard to get back objectivity anyways at this point. You've done too much to the song. So to me, if I mix and master, I sort of do it in the same session almost. Like it's like part of mixing. I do mastering. I do make sure it translates well. I do make sure I have the right loudness and all this. And I separate the technical step, the sequencing, the metadata and all that. I'd separate that. But like the sonics, I do that as I'm mixing more or less because I can only make it sound as good as I can. Yep. And it doesn't make a difference if I do it today or tomorrow or in 3 days. It's just when I'm done, I'm done. And like an external person could make it even better probably because it's a different room, different ears, different perspective. But I can't. I took it as far as I could. So I think, and if you're mixing yourself, I think I would, if you do it yourself, the mastering, I would do it in the mixing session. I would make it the best you can. Make it sound the best and just take it as far as you can and then just stop, because I don't think a separate mastering session will make things better. But that might just be me. No.
Yeah, so I that's a pretty old school methodology. Maybe that's a word. But you know what I mean. It's pretty old school to go with the assumption that like, I'm not going to do anything on the two bus because the mastering is going to be that step. Most people these days mix into some kind of chain. And that might not be like quite a mastering chain, but it's usually pretty close. And most people mix into a limiter of some kind because why would you be making decisions that might get screwed up later? You just want to be making decisions knowing that's the decision you've made. So it's a more new school thought, but it is very popular and how most people seem to be doing it these days, regardless to if they plan to have it mastered elsewhere. Where most mixer engineers are mixing into a chain and then just turning off the limiter or whatever to give to the mastering engineer after the fact. So that's a little bit of a misconception that I think some people aren't aware of, that like you're allowed to be doing that stuff at the same time. It's okay. And I would say you should be making it sound exactly like you want it to.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's sum it up real quick. So let's say, what do we go with? An EP or a record?
I like a song.
A song. Okay, yeah, let's do a song. Okay.
Because you can assume that if you add more, it should get shorter because of batching and stuff. But a song is like our minimum unit of measurement.
Okay, so a song. Let's say, in the case of just one song, I'd say a week for like getting pre-pro done and refining the song. Okay. Or would you say more than that? But I think a week should do. If you take your time and you chip away at it every day, or you batch it over 2 or 3 days, I think you should work for a song, right?
Yeah. No, that's the most abstract part of this, because I think that's probably, that's not 5 or 7, 8 hour days at all. It's that's like little sessions, taking it and listening to it, like all of this decision making and stuff like that. And like, so it's kind of hard to say how long that would take, but I think the most important thing we could just say is give yourself a deadline for this.
Yes, I think so. I think so. It will be done when you say it will be done. If you say we need the pre-pro to be done next week, you'll get it done by next week. And if you say it will be done in 3 months, it will take you 3 months. So
it'll take 3 months.
yeah, exactly. But like, no need to take forever. That's what I'm about to say. So I think with a normal life and a job and everything, if you have one weekend and maybe a couple of evenings, you could do like 2 or 3 rounds of pre-pro maybe, and like, or refine what you already have. So it shouldn't take forever, like a week or 2 or something, and then it should be done. Assuming that the song is already written. Okay, cool. Then, okay.
Sorry, interrupting, but going into when I was producing and we were doing this like over email, just like they're jamming, sending me a new version. I send notes, they get together and jam, send me new versions. Yeah, generally that was about a week. I think that lines up really well.
Yeah. Okay, so then the recording, including the setup, I'd say for one song, if you do it properly, 2 to 3 days, probably for one song.
Agreed. Yeah. I always aimed for 2 days, but more often than not, it ended up being 2 days plus an overdub session, like a little short session to get backing vocals and percussion or whatever. Yeah.
So, and again, I'm saying that again, it's like 2 or 3 days usually, and it's totally normal. And I'm saying that because I've had so many people that I'm mixing for tell me that if I ask, like, is there the possibility to change something? Like, did you record it yourself or with an external engineer? They're like, yeah, I did everything myself. And if I had to, I could re-record the whole thing in an afternoon. And I'm like, probably not. So, if you're that person, it should actually take longer than just an afternoon to record a song properly, even if in professional scenario, so.
Maybe we should theorize on what is happening if they're recording it in an afternoon. What is making that possible? Because it's not possible. So something's happening. Something's being missed, right?
Okay, so let's assume they don't have to do a lot of setup because they program drums. They easily quantized or whatever. They just do DIs. They don't have to worry about miking amps and stuff. So they do the bare minimum. Let's say that is out of the way. That makes things faster. But even then, I think an afternoon is not enough, because I think what happens if people do that is they don't record enough takes. I think they end up using takes that are not really good, and you need to do a lot of tweaking and editing and fixing, and you should have spent more time really nailing the takes. And I think that's what's most of the time what's happening. Like, most of the time, the takes are just not good enough after just a couple of hours.
Totally agree. Buzzing strings that aren't meant to be hit happening, little, drum tempos all over the way. Editing is probably being skipped entirely in these, do it in an afternoon sessions. It's no editing happening, and we all know what that sounds like. And I mean, the situation you just described, tones are kind of not happening. There isn't really tonal choices being made that much because the drums are virtual. It's just a DI, and there's going to be a vocal probably. So there's like less engineering going on trying to tone shape, but there still is some. You should still be monitoring like a amp sim or something with your DIs that should sound kind of like you hope it will. Right. So there's still tone hunting to be done in those situations, and that is engineering. Creating the picture of how the song's going to sound.
Yeah. Also choosing the proper drum samples, the right kick drum, because how do you know which bass tone to go with if you don't know which kick drum you're going to use? All these things. So there is engineering, definitely. And then even if you really keep that to a minimum, if you want to the vocal tracking alone, if you have a proper vocal arrangement, which in most modern cases it's more than just a lead vocal, a double, and a harmony. It's could be 15, 20, 25 or more vocal tracks and these stacks and harmonies and like all these things, if you do it properly and to record that really well, this just takes time. Like they have to be lined up properly. Like you shouldn't have like plosives all over the place coming from left and right and sibilants and all this. Like the intonation, of course, the feeling of the vocals, of course. So to properly track vocal layers and a good vocal arrangement, that alone just takes time, even if you skip the drums and guitars and that entirely. So I'd say that probably, yeah, that's what's happening. I think people didn't pay enough attention to detail. That's what it is. And it's not because they don't want to. It's just because I think people are not aware, or like you have to learn to even spot those things. You might honestly think that it's good enough and you're done, but compared to that professional standard, it's probably just not. And you should pay a lot of attention to all the details, and you should never approach it with this mindset of like, yeah, that's probably good enough. They're going to make it work. Like, that's not what you want to do. We can probably make it work if you outsource the mixing or the editing. Like, usually we can do some sort of magic thing to make it work, but it's always better if you pay attention to detail and deliver better takes. And if you're mixing yourself, you absolutely need to do that, because if you don't do it in tracking, chances are you don't do it in mixing as well. And then it gets skipped entirely and it ends up on the record and everybody knows what that sounds like. These are the typical basement demos or the records that just don't sound like a record.
Right. Yeah. You're not happy.
No, exactly. Okay, so 2 to 3 days.
2 to 3 days recording, editing.
Including editing, you'd say?
Yeah.
I'd even say if you edit yourself, it's probably longer than that. I'd say if you do the whole song, everything completely yourself, and you're not experienced, it could maybe take you 5 days or a week to get that done, honestly.
Yeah, depending on the music, for sure. Yeah.
If you're a metal band and you need a lot of editing and you have like blast beats and fast drum fills and like guitars that need to be spot on the drums and stuff, like it could take you a week to edit that properly and like record and edit that properly.
Definitely. Yeah. So yeah, there's always situations that could be less, and live off the floor, bed tracks and stuff, that that's a different situation as well. But most bands are kind of doing our customer avatar on this podcast is somebody that's probably doing either like a permanently set up drum recording thing or drum programming, like you said, and then using DIs a lot and stuff. Like that's kind of like the bare minimum that gets great results. So that's kind of what this is all shaped around: the overdubbing, small recording rig musicians.
Yes.
Okay, so 2 to 3 days, that makes sense. Mixing. Now, here's something we didn't say earlier that I thought we should mention. Mixing. So mixing a song in a day, sure, that's great. Mixing a self-recorded song in a day is kind of a different thing. I would say that Benny and I have a unique skill set in that we are professionals at getting tracks from self-recorded bands. That's like something we have we're used to receiving files like that. And they are, usually there's something in there that's done differently than we're used to from a studio. Or like that somebody's got a producer and an engineer on board that's doing all the editing and stuff. There's kind of different tricks, there's probably a lot less drum mics than we're used to receiving from a big studio and stuff like that. So we have kind of unique skill sets that make us get those songs where we need them and want them to be, despite how they were recorded. And you, as trying to mix it yourself, probably aren't there. What I'm saying is that I think we actually should assume that if you're mixing it yourself, it's going to take longer than we estimated because of that. It's more work is really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, there's this episode could go on forever because there's so many things I'm thinking about, like so many things that are specific to the self-recording band situation. So I would probably add a little to everything that we say here, because there's also the preparation of the sessions and stuff, like the cleanup, like how we are very good at, like, when we record, we keep our sessions sort of clean, we consolidate things, we all these things. After you're done recording, your session might be a mess, and then until you get to a spot where you can actually mix properly, there might be an additional day just to clean things up. All these things, like that totally depends on your experience and how much, how organized you are. All these things, we can't really talk about that because we don't know your situation. But okay, a rule of thumb, I still think that 2 to 3 days to track and edit, up to, like, let's say 2 days to between 2 days and a week depending on your genre and all that. But that's still a time frame that's good for people to know, because it doesn't. We're not saying 3 months, and we're not saying one afternoon. We say 2 days to a week or so for a song, and then you should definitely be done. And if that's not the case, you probably should get help, like hire someone, or like organize yourself better, or like take some time off or whatever. And then the mixing, I'd say also maybe 2 to 3 days, probably. Cleaning up everything and then do the actual mix. And then there's revisions. Totally depends on your communication and all that. We don't know that. But I'd say 2 to 3 days to mix. And then anything from another 2 days to maybe 2 weeks or so until you're done doing the revisions.
Yeah.
So at this point, we're looking at anything between a week and a month or so for a song.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. And that seems crazy when we do add it up, because I think a month is an obscene amount of time. But it is possible.
It is possible, yeah. Especially with like pre-pro, tracking, editing, mixing. Like it could take you a month. That's totally fine. It shouldn't take you much longer than that. But I would also be surprised if you could get it done faster than a week or so. So I'd say between a week and a month, maybe per song.
Yeah, I think that you should be aiming for a week. I really do think that most people would probably benefit. I think the product would benefit if they were like, we're going to get it done this week. Let's book out our time slots. Like, we've got the weekend. Maybe call it like 2 weekends. Like, so start on a weekend, have some evening sessions through the work week, and then finish on the weekend again.
Yes. That way you can do the pre-pro during the work week. In the evenings, finish the demos. On the weekend, you're going to record. Then you give yourself the evenings again to clean things up, and do things. And then the next weekend you're going to mix. That sounds like a solid plan, maybe.
Yeah, I like that. And having it plotted out and on a calendar, then kind of, use that Motion app that just got mentioned at the beginning of this episode. But deadlines. That's so much of what being a professional is hitting deadlines and hitting those kind of like progress markers. So don't undervalue that at all, and strive. It's weird because I think when you're getting into this, you think more time is better, but I really think that's often the opposite. I think the product would probably benefit from trying to do less time and it's like higher quality, more focused work in less time.
Yes. And I'd say it gets a lot shorter when we talk about EPs and records, like full records, albums, because a lot of the prep work will be the same for all the songs. You might have to do things over and over again, but the thought, like, you don't have to think about it as much, and like some things are just done. So I'd say even if the first song takes you a month to really get everything done from pre-pro to final mix, it still could be possible to do the whole record in 3 months or so, which would be reasonable for a self-recording band. So. Okay, so for one song, anything between a week and a month or so, I would consider okay. For an EP or a record, anything that's longer than 3 or 4 months, I would start questioning the plan, or I would be worried that you actually get it done. I've seen bands successfully pull it off in a year or in half a year, so that could be done. But as you said, Malcolm, I try to do it faster. But I'd also not go for like a record in a week or so. So again, that's balance.
That's crazy.
Okay, and then there's one thing we need to. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we might be on the same trend here, that this timeline is about doing everything yourself, more or less, right? Mixing and mastering and stuff like that. Where if you are a band that is prioritizing content, like you're much more concerned about having music out there in the world than learning how to do this stuff, there's huge advantages to outsourcing some of these steps. And then time would be a huge one. Like a guy like Benny, who might be able to mix 2 or 3 songs in a day, you're going to get that album done a lot quicker if all you have to do is record it. You just got to get the songs down and send them to somebody like Benny or myself, and then you just get the songs back way quicker than you were expecting, right? Now you are just constantly churning out material, sending it off. I have a relationship with a band called Wet Future. I've mentioned on this, and that's what they do. They just record tracks, send it to me. I feel like I'm just like every month I get a song from them, and we're just on this like cycle, and it's so quick and efficient, and they've just got content lined up. They've got like 2 or 3 songs in the bank ready to go. It's awesome.
Yeah, I agree with everything. If you schedule that properly and you book early enough, because
Yes. That's
when you tell me that like it's your plan and that in 3 months you want to record this record and you need the mix by then and by that and so date, then we'll absolutely make that happen and you get it back within a couple of days because I know it's going to happen. If you tell me we're recording this week and next week on Wednesday we need the mix, it's not going to happen because and like that's just like everybody's different and not everybody's booked up, but like you have to plan that stuff ahead and book your sessions and like stick to your deadlines because our calendars are full. Like if professional, like it's not the same for everybody, but most professional mixers are booked out like sometimes months in advance, like but at least weeks in advance probably. So it's faster from the moment you send the songs, like from the starting date of the mixing project to the final mixes. This will be much faster than doing it yourself. Mm-hmm. But between booking it and actually starting the mix could be 2 or 3 months or 3 or 4 weeks or whatever it is. Like in my case, sometimes if you hit me up now, you'll get your mixes back in late April, probably the earliest, because I'm booked up until that time, you know? So, and you need to think about those things because that can totally like mess up the whole schedule that you made for yourself if you don't account for that. So
this is again just more reason to be making hard deadlines on a calendar for the whole band and to be like, all right, we're finishing tracking this day, period. And that lets you book somebody for mixing in advance, right? You're like, you're going to have files by this day, we promise. So that means that you could be mixing like your system can be editing, like prepping them the next day. You know, if the mixer knows that's coming and I mean, they're probably going to collect a deposit from you to ensure that you stick to it. But it's totally possible to get way ahead of the curve. I don't know if I should say this. It's like my secret. I'm just going to do it. I usually keep a couple slots open for singles in my calendar.
Me too.
So yeah, it's like, you get one and you get excited and you're like, oh, this song's kick-ass, I want to do it right now. And it works with singles. But if you hit me up and you're like, I got a whole album mixed right now, it's like, well, that's going to be a while out. It's just, because I can't fit all that in right now.
I actually keep my whole schedule pretty flexible. This is why I'm so excited about an app like Motion, because I had to do it manually all the time. So I don't really book fixed slots even for albums, because I just know the realities. Even if people pay a deposit and they say they're going to stick to it, life will get in the way and they're going to deliver late or something. And I was just tired of that, and I don't want to make people pay more because of that. Like, so what happens now is I want to know about, like, you give me some sort of date, some sort of when do you want this to be finished, and then I know that it's going to happen there. And when we get closer to the date, we sort of agree on a certain date, but there's always a little bit of buffer and it's a little bit of flexibility there, and I'm pretty good at navigating that. But if you deliver way late, if you say we're gonna do it in April, but then you deliver it in June, that might mean you need to wait 2 months or so, because that's, I think everybody understands that. It's just about planning ahead, communicating well, sticking to your own deadlines, making realistic deadlines, like just plan a buffer into everything you do. And then it should work out. Just know that don't be surprised if a mixer tells you, I can do that EP in half a year or so. Like, I know like really busy, great mixers who they are already booked up for the rest of the year. And I've been in situations, it always changes for me, but I've been in situations where I was booked up half a year in advance. And for full length records at the moment, it would be probably July or something until I can give you a slot. So that always changes, but like, don't be surprised if a mixer tells you that.
Yeah. The more content you've got being recorded, the more you need to think about this for sure.
Yeah. Or you find a model where you're like, okay, every month we're going to send you a song or two, and you can work something out that way, because as you said, Malcolm, we always have like a little flexibility for singles usually. And if you can say, okay, like, let's do just one a month, then you have regular content. You don't have to wait forever until you get it. And when everything's done, you can still put it on a record if you want. There's always ways. Just plan ahead and communicate well.
Exactly. That communication solves everything.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So that was a little bit... That was a rambly one, but I think that's valuable.
That was incredibly rambly.
Yeah, but I still think a good one, and I think we got it across. I think the whole takeaway, the main takeaway is just don't rush it, but don't take forever, and know that I'd say that we've ended up on a pretty good, like, basic sort of recommendation timeline. Just know that like anything between a week and a month for a song is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of hidden things in between what we said, I think.
That's why it was so rambly, is you and I just kept kind of having like, well, what if, and like little ideas coming up. And so it was interesting for us to talk about this as well. But I hope through osmosis of us questioning our own thoughts, you've been able to kind of pick up some perspective on how long this should be taking you.
Yeah, exactly. Look at your life, at the most important things in your life that you just can't reschedule, and then find space in your calendar where you can fit the music in, and then just plan it out and see how long it will actually take you. And we're talking about like net time that you actually work on it in most cases. So even if it's like 3 months in your case because you're really busy and you have a crazy job and a family and kids, if you stick to the process and you work that one evening that you have per week or so, if you keep working on your song, it might take you longer, but the overall time you work on it shouldn't be longer because of that. So just do whatever fits into your life, but just find a way to not make it take forever.
Agreed.
Okay. I hope that was helpful, despite all the rambling. And we'll get to more actionable audio stuff again in the future, I promise. But sometimes episodes like these are important because whenever I have the feeling that people are confused about a topic or there's conflicting information out there, we need to talk about it.
Totally. And know that ideally you're going to get quicker every time. You know, the first time is going to take a while because you're going to get stuck with your DAW and, you know, figuring different software out. There's so many little obstacles ahead, but that's part of it. So just embrace it and know that you're learning so that the next one will go even smoother. It's all
exactly
good. It's the long
and
game.
if you think you could use some accountability and someone to walk you through all this, to guide you through this, to make a plan with you, to create a roadmap with you, to make sure you actually finish the project you said you want to finish, or to make you spend more time on it because otherwise you'll be cutting corners or whatever. If you need someone like that in your life, then book a free call with me and let's talk about that, because that's exactly what I do in my coaching program. Like I'm there to hold people accountable, to walk them through the process, to tell them, hey, this needs more time, more work, or hey, we should get that done faster because you're taking forever. I'm going to show you exactly why things are taking forever, what I would change. I'm going to show you why you're not paying enough attention to detail, or I'm going to tell you when things are excellent, whatever it is. But like I'm there to guide you through this. That's what I do. So if you feel like you could benefit from that, then just go to theselfrecordingband.com/call, book a free first call with me. Let's talk about your project, your music, the thing you're working on, you want to finish, and let's see if I can help you take that over the finish line without it taking forever.
Do it. It's such a good idea. Awesome.
All right.
I want to shamelessly plug something as well.
Yeah, do it.
My other podcast, Your Band Sucks at Business, we just recorded an episode 2 weeks ago that's coming out on the first Tuesday of March, which will have happened by the time this episode is out, I think. I love this episode. It was such a good chat. We have our friend Kurt Dahl on, who is an entertainment lawyer. And he's also kind of a rock star. He's a drummer in a band called One Bad Son, which has done some really cool stuff. They're the real deal. And yeah, such a good hang. But we talked about like copywriting and ownership stuff. In particular, Taylor Swift re-recording her catalog again, to kind of like regain ownership of her master recordings. It was just a crazy conversation. I learned so much, and I feel like our audience would probably really enjoy it.
Definitely. Go to, what do they go to? yourbandssucksatbusiness.com?
Yep, that'll do it, or just search it on Spotify or your podcast app, whatever. You'll find it for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool episodes that are helpful for every self-recording band, I think, on there if you want to check that out. There's some crazy, entertaining episodes. Like I remember the one with Joel Wanasek that was like that was like controversial also, but like in some cases, but like it's just an entertaining thing, and like so many cool things to take away from that episode. Then there's the episode with Jacob Hansen, who we had on the podcast as well. That one I remembered and loved. So tons of cool interviews, and I think you should take that part just as serious if you want people to listen to your music, which we all do, right? So
Totally. Well, I assume so.
Yeah. All right. Then thank you for listening. See you next week.
Thank you.